All right, welcome to the show. Thank you so much, Mike, for joining us on the show. It's been a while since we've talked. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. I just had my twins graduate from college, and so that was
Oh.
a moment in our lives, and so that's a happy time, and I'm doing well, and I'm really thank you for having me back. I'm happy to see you again and to be with you.
Yeah, so that's a huge thing. Your twins graduating from college.
Yeah, it is really, and it went by so quickly.
I bet.
It's incredible. So I'm happy for them. They've worked hard, and they both have jobs, and they're going to start their career. So it's a nice thing.
Wow, that is really cool. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. Thank
So
you.
again, thank you for coming on the show. This is actually, I think it's your fourth time on the show. We were just talking about this before the show. You were actually the first guest of the Global Phys Ed Voxcast. At that time, it was just called the Voxcast. It was just a sort of experiment that a bunch of us were experimenting with on Voxer, and we thought, hey, let's make a podcast. And I thought, I know Mike Kuczala. I can communicate with him and he can tell us all about this really cool brain research and all this kinesthetic movement and how to embed it in the classroom and all that good stuff, which you did. Our first show was, I thought, was a huge success. And I think we've been doing this now for three and a half years or something like that. And so we're still going, and here we are.
Yeah, that's great. I was really felt privileged to be your first guest, and these are always fun for me to do,
Yeah.
particularly. And yeah, happy to be part. I do have. We just discussed this before we came on air, but really fun memory of doing the Voxcast with you. And I was with Andy Vasily in a rooftop bar in Manila.
Yeah.
We were just getting to know each other, and we did this Voxcast with you, and it was really a fun night.
Yeah, that was really cool too, because that was one that was so again, you were the first guest, so that was like an experiment in itself, you know. And then that live show in on the rooftop in another country, that was a first. And then now it's like I've seen you be, on social media, you've presented like all over the world now, and uh, I'm here in Saudi Arabia, and there's been so many changes to, I guess, both of our lives. Like you were saying, your kids are graduating from college, and that these are huge experiences. So take us through that a little bit. Like what has been going on with you in the last? When was the last time we talked? Maybe a couple years ago. So
Yeah,
you've been pretty busy in the last couple of years. What have
yeah. I
you been
mean,
up to?
yeah. So, well, in 2017, our my third book and the second book that I've written with Tracy Langle came out. Uh, with new activities, and we reshaped the framework a little bit, and we looked at how the research uh, has grown, and also what was going on in the classroom with equipment, and tried to put this all into the book, and so that's been a nice change, and I'm really comfortable in my shoes, which is nice. And I get invited to a lot of fantastic places, and places I might not have traveled, from Johannesburg to Kuala Lumpur, Tokyo to Barcelona and Montreal, and I have some cool trips planned for next year. And we're just doing a lot of work around the United States as well. And I'm always really honored and privileged. I see myself as a teacher. I always have. I come from a family of them, and this is just how my life has grown. And still continuing to work for the Regional Training Center. We partner with LaSalle University and the College of New Jersey to offer graduate coursework. And I'm really happy being an administrator in that setting. I have lots of challenges all the time in my life, and that's really good. Keeps my brain on edge, and that's good for me as I'm not getting any younger.
Yeah, challenges are good. I think that's a good a good point to make, that we have to sometimes embrace these challenges. And I know I've seen you present. I've seen some of your keynotes online, and they're just excellent, and they're always on point. And I know on your website you have some clips of some of your speeches and some of your keynotes, as well as your TED Talk, which everybody should definitely check out. And I'll put a link to the notes on that. Um, but you talk about risk. One of the things you talk about is taking those responsible risks, and it seems like you've been doing that in your life. So can you talk a little bit about taking responsible risks and how that's gotten you basically where you are?
Yeah, when I've been in front of student groups is really when I do talk about risk with adults as well, but when I've been with students, I talk about risk as being one of those core uh, fundamentals that really push your life forward. It's about getting comfortable in your zone of discomfort and
Yeah.
making that then your comfort zone. And that's what I've continued to try and do. I just found peace there, as much as sometimes it makes my life topsy-turvy. But I left my teaching position in 2003, and at that point in my life, I had been teaching 10 years. I started teaching a little bit later, and I had teachers come up to me and say, "How could you leave this retirement after 10 years?" And I just, that wasn't going. I loved my teaching life in the public school, but that wasn't going to satisfy me. And I had a chance to go to the regional training center and create graduate courses, write books, speak all over the world. All those things represented some risk because it's not everything's going to work out. I've had
Mm.
setbacks, but getting comfortable with responsible risk just moves your life forward in a positive way.
So
So
what do you think that is? I know there's been a couple books that I've seen recently written about, you know, I'm trying to think of the name of the book, but Jonathan Haidt's his new book, he talks about people being anti-fragile, and he talks about the importance of, like you said, challenging yourself and getting to this place where you are uncomfortable, and getting over that, and then incrementally having these challenges become a little bit more difficult and more difficult. And if you fail, you just get back up and try again, right? So in your perspective and in your life and in your, the opportunities that you've created for yourself, how has that been a part of your life? Like these incremental challenges, taking these risks, how important is that in your life?
it's really important. So I'm a anyone who knows me well knows I'm a big Tony Robbins fan and have been
Yeah.
so since my early 20s. It's been like 30 years. And one of the things he says, I'm paraphrasing, but just that whole uncomfortable is just where the juice of life is, and
Mm.
its greatest reward has been. So that's why I know what's on the other side of it. I've had enough life experience now to understand what is on the other side of that risk, and I know that there are fantastic rewards that are possible. And sometimes my wife and we lead these big lives, especially with, I've taken care of my parents. We do work with her parents, my kids, we travel. We both taught, and it's we're getting to a point where a lot of that's going away, and so I'm not a good sitter. I mean,
Yeah.
okay, now I'm not quite ready to write another book, but what are the next things that I can do? What are the next risks that I can take? And the other thing that I'm comfortable with is failure and getting it wrong, because it's just free information about what not to do next time. And I think that's critical for kids to understand. I think culturally, there's starting to be a shift where it's okay to be wrong. People understand that there is risk involved in that, and it's okay to be wrong so that we can move in the right direction. It's a valuable, valuable information. So that continues to propel my life forward. And I know that now intellectually. It seems scary when you're younger, but now I know, okay, I'm going to take this risk. I'm okay if it doesn't work. And I know that if one of the things that hits, because I throw a lot of stuff against the wall, that it's going to make my life better and move my career forward.
So for you, where do you think that comes from? Because I mean, I've been kind of reflecting on my journey as well, and taking the risk to come to Saudi Arabia, and Andy Vasily just had this Pechakucha night at his house, and it was 9 different speakers doing these Pechakucha speeches, and it's basically 20 slides, 20 seconds each slide. And I got up and I gave a speech, and it was basically the sort of the story of my life, of how I've sort of taken risks throughout my life, and then bringing it back to my mom's story. And so my mom's story, just very briefly, is that her father passed away when she was 13 years old, and she comes from a really small town in Mexico, and her and her sister had to go to the United States to make money for the family. So there was 4 girls, and her parents, and her dad was the only, a person that made any income. And so she went to the United States at 13 years old, not knowing the language, not knowing the culture, not knowing anybody, with her 16-year-old sister, and found a job, finally earned enough money to bring the rest of the family to the United States. And then, passing that on to me. I was born in the U.S., and I had those benefits of being a U.S. citizen. And I remember when I was a little kid, she told me, "We came to the United States for you." And that was something for me. It was huge, and something that I've always taken, with me. It's always been with me. But those are huge risks, right? That she took some sort of out of necessity, and when things get difficult, I think a lot of times I subconsciously, sometimes even consciously, think back to the risks that my parents have taken and the sacrifices that they've made for me, and that helps me. So where do you think that comes from for you? Like, how did you develop this comfortableness with being uncomfortable and taking those risks?
Yeah, Jorge, that's a great story. And you think
Thanks.
what your mom did and what your parents have done, and it affects generations, many, many generations. It's changed the whole trajectory of your family.
Yeah.
And I think some of that helps me to also frame what my father's parents did. They came over from Poland, just had nothing. They met here in the United States, and my dad was one of 10 kids. They were so poor. And what they did, though, imagine today we have phones. We're always, there's so much interconnectedness. You're never alone. Imagine.
We're talking on Zoom, and we're in totally different countries.
Right. So it's really incredible what they did and what they achieved, and so that gives me momentum. You know what? I think that I had a very visionary superintendent. My first job. His name is Dr. Bratman. My first job was in the Wiggins School District in eastern Colorado, out in the plains, town of 500 to 800 people, depending. And he was into the brain research. We had internet long before anyone else around us had it. We're talking this was early 90s, early to mid 90s, and he got me into Tony Robbins. I hate to keep coming back to Tony, but he's done so much for my life. Yeah. Hear his voice, it makes me stand up straight. I've listened to him so many times. Spent a week with him in Las Vegas at his business mastery.
Oh wow!
So what I'm a fan of good stuff in, good stuff out. So I on my social media feeds, I have different guys that I like: Tony Robbins, Brendan Bouchard, just so many different kind of whatever self-help gurus. But I love reading that. And I love absorbing it. I love using it in my talks that I do. And that's who they are. And that made me comfortable. It's like, okay, I can do this too. And then once you take small risks and have success, it's like goal setting for kids. You have to open the door to success. So goal setting should be short and sweet at the beginning. Let them feel success. Okay, we can do a little bit more with this. Same thing with my life. And now it's just, okay, I'm good. Let's go for this.
Yeah.
So I think it's because of my family is very supportive, and because of the kind of the motivational leaders that I have listened to over the years have really helped.
That's great, because I also, when you were talking, I like that sort of incremental approach that as you mentioned, is really important in teaching as well. To help the kids find that sort of Goldilocks zone of challenge, so it's not too difficult so that they give up, and it's not too easy so that there's also a sense of giving up, because it's like, it's too easy, I'm not going to do this. And so you have to find that just right challenge for yourself, and it seems like that's what you've done in your life, which is great. And you mentioned some of the talks that you give and some of the speeches that you give. And like I said, I've seen you present and sort of give some speeches online as well. And there was one speech that I didn't get to hear, but your keynote at the California CAFED, I saw a lot of buzz about it online, and a lot of people were talking about your physical literacy journey, and that being very inspirational. Could you share a little bit about that with the audience?
Sure. And you know what, Jorge, that was a huge risk.
Yeah.
It's completely different from what I had ever done before, and it was time to challenge myself. But also, I've talked to a lot of physical education, physical educators over the years, groups of district-wide PE teachers, mostly about, though, the Kinesthetic Classroom and the brain research. So, like, how can I even grab them more? So, you know, people listening to this podcast, watching this, or wherever it's going to end up on YouTube or whatever, I don't know what your belief system are, but I will say my father, who passed away about 3.5 years ago now, he came to me one day and pretty much outlined this talk. It was an experience. I can't even describe it to you here, and the next 2 songs that came on the radio were perfect. So now one is at the beginning of that keynote and one is at the end. And it was my physical literacy journey. So all of these risks that I took in my life, the big ones and the big events where I had a lot of success, they were always preceded, excuse me, sorry. They were always preceded by a physical success. My definition of physical success. So, you know, whether it was changing my major in college to become a music major, that was preceded by a physical journey on my end, which was a bodybuilding journey, because I wasn't a very good student, but I had this in my life and it propelled me forward.
Well, hold on. I got to stop you right there. A body.
Try not to give too much of my keynote away.
Well, you can't just tease the bodybuilding journey. I need to know a little bit about the bodybuilding journey. I had no idea that you were a bodybuilder. Okay, tell me a little bit. Just tell me a little bit about the bodybuilding journey.
Okay.
And then we'll get back into.
No, I'm not giving away the key. That's if I can talk about it. And anyone who, I don't know if anyone follows me on Instagram, but there is a picture on Instagram of me at 20 years of age. Just on stage in a bodybuilding scenario.
Oh, wow. I had no idea.
I posted it recently as a part of this whole keynote because I show the picture. So when I was about 17, 18 years of age, I found a weight room and it just changed my life. That physical journey in bodybuilding. I only competed in 2 competitions. I was never going to take steroids, which everyone around me was. And I just wasn't, gifted to be this fantastic bodybuilder, but all the discipline and the dedication and the direction and confidence, and it was amazing. And then right after my last competition, like 4 months later, I became a music major. That's a whole story in itself. That's a part of the keynote. It's too long for here. It's a crazy story because I never played note of music in my life. And I was a business major. So anyway, I became this music major. And, fast forward in the keynote, right before my first book was published, for the first time in my life, I ran a 10-mile road race, the Broad Street Run. Changed my life because at the end of that race, I felt like I could do anything. And it was a physical success that got me to that level. Emotionally, I can do anything now. I'd never run more than 3 or 4 miles in my life, and I ran this 10-mile race. And the theme from Rocky was playing, and the people were cheering, and I finished this race. And I finished, whatever I finished, like number 8,000, finished, and it was great. And then eventually there were some other things that happened in my life. When my dad got sick, there were kind of a low point. And I got into a bad way physically. I wasn't working out like I should. I wasn't eating like I should. I wasn't sleeping like I should. And it was not a good time. And I used physical activity to pull me out. It was yoga. It was mountain biking. It was the elliptical. It was hiking. It pulled me out of where I was. And I will tell you this too, because I've posted about this on social media. So I'll just say it now. Because if I can inspire anyone else, I would love to do that. As of last September, so, I'm working on a year now. It'll be I was on metformin for 4 years. That's how long. I mean, this is the guy who speaks about physical activity. The guy whose life is about being physical. And my life got to a point where I had to go on that for a time. And now I'm off. I worked my way off of it, which I know is difficult to do, but I was just determined. But it was that physical piece that got me out. So here we are. It's all good and happy. So what I do in that keynote is to share the emotional side of physical literacy and how it pushes a child's life forward, and how, a phys ed, a physical educator, how they approach it emotionally with students and the bigger picture that they're giving them. Like, I want them to know my experience so that they're able to really think about that and process it to give it to their kids. Because without that physical side of life, and it's hard. Health is wealth is like, yeah, that's true. You don't have that. You don't have anything else. You can't do anything else.
Yeah.
It's important for me.
So what was it? What do you think was that spark for you? Because I know 'cause a lot of times, we have the knowledge, we understand that physical activity, eating right, getting enough sleep, taking care of yourself is really, really important. But time after time, we see people who sort of neglect themselves, and they get into this to this valley, right? And it's hard to climb out of it. My brother, recently went through a time when he was feeling a bit depressed, right? And same kind of thing. It was physical activity that sort of helped him, or was that I guess like catalyst, for lack of a better term, to help him kind of get out of it. So what was it for you that kind of sparked that, even though you had the knowledge, to spark that idea that, oh, you know what, I haven't been taking care of myself, and that's part of the reason why I might be feeling bad.
Yeah, it's a combination of things. If I'm being completely honest, I don't love being on medications. So that drives me.
Yeah.
As a 50-some-year-old adult male, I'm on a small dose of some things to, 'cause that's just where I'm at in life. But going on to metformin I just hated that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that was one of the driving forces. We've also, all of my family, the family I grew up in, we've always lived a physical life. And I so think that motivates me as well. It's like, Mike, okay, now, enough. A part of it too is probably vanity. I was gaining weight. I didn't like feeling that way. I didn't like looking that way. I mean, I go out and speak and talk about these physical life and physical life for students in the classroom, being physically active. And so if I'm going to talk about that, I've got to live it. So that was a huge motivation for me too, just to get back what my normal. And so I was able to do that, which I'm very, very happy about.
Do you feel like those expectations of you being on stage talking about these things contributed to that sort of the pitfall that you found yourself in?
Yeah. So you mean getting me back out of that?
No, like because I've heard people talk about the expectations placed on them by either presenting or being sort of on stage in some respect, being too much pressure sometimes to handle, or not being or not knowing how to handle those pressures. Do you think that had anything to do with it as well?
Yeah, you know what? I don't think so, because I'm one of those weird few that my happy place is with a mic in my hand, or
Really?
my head. And so I mean, I feel I get nervous still, but once I start, that goes away.
Yeah.
So not too much. I put more pressure on myself to be presenting or be presented in a certain way, because I do work in a public space, and you have to walk walk the talk, and I was not doing that. So that pressured me more than anything else.
Hmm. Okay, so I want to get back to you kind of teased the story of you not knowing how to play music and then
Yeah.
changing your major to become a music major. I knew you were a musician. I knew you were a music major, but I didn't know this side of the story of you not knowing how to play music at all. So again, I don't want you to give away your whole speech, but
It's okay.
I gotta ask. Tell me a little bit about this journey into music.
Yeah. So I was a business major, and I was doing miserably. In high school, I had to pass photography to have enough credits to graduate. I had two D's and two F's. This author had two D's and two F's his senior year in English. I was just not a good student. I didn't care. So I went off to college, and it wasn't much better. 2 years of being a business major, my low semester was a 1.57, and I couldn't pass computer courses back then, because back then it was COBOL, it was Fortran, it wasn't personal computing. But finally, I changed universities, and it turned into personal computing that semester. And so it turned into the floppy disk thing. The floppy disks were bigger than the IBM computer, so I was able to handle that. But I couldn't take anything else. I couldn't get into my upper level business courses until I passed the computer course. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to take some other classes. I thought, Mike, you like music more than you than most people. So I signed up for a 20th century music class because I thought it was going to be about, Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, and the Beatles. And it turns out it was about Rimsky-Korsakov and Prokofiev and Copland. Loved it. And signed up for an intro to music course and just fell in love. I marched into the department chair's office and I said, I want to be a music major. And she said, what do you play? And I said, nothing. She's probably, I could never get away with this at that university today. She's probably thinking, what is he doing here? So a long story short, she relented. I had to pick an instrument. And as embarrassing as this is, it's a true story. I picked the saxophone because I liked the way it looked on Rob Lowe and St. Elmo's Fire. But you know what? I got over the next 2 years, I got a BA in music. I got pretty good pretty quickly. It's one of those things I should have been doing for a long time. I just wasn't. And that's how that started. Then I had a 10-year band, choral, directing career and just loved every minute of it.
Wow, that's awesome. So again, going back to the risk, that's a huge risk to take.
It's just, I don't know, somehow it got into my DNA after a while. It was a huge risk and it paid off big time. Then I moved to Colorado. I had a huge network of friends, family here in Pennsylvania. And I moved to Colorado to go to the University of Northern Colorado, which has a really great music school. Huge risk again. I had nobody or nothing. And it was the best 9 years of my life. It was incredible.
That's awesome.
Kids were born there. So I've always been, willing to take on these things. What the heck? So.
That's awesome. That's great. So I did want to talk about, a lot of your work is kind of connected to that whole brain-body connection piece, and your book, The Kinesthetic Classroom, is all about making these connections with movement, and you also do this for corporations as well. So I know there's a lot of people out there that still kind of think about it in two separate ways, that the brain does this one thing and the body does this other thing, and they're not necessarily connected. And I remember this back to our time that we spent with Jean Blades in her workshop. I don't know if you remember this, but a long time ago, I think we were in Indianapolis, and she's talking about an elevator speech. If you had 2 minutes in an elevator and you had to give this elevator speech to somebody about the importance of making that connection, what would that be?
Yeah, so what I would tell them is how I open my talks, as two examples so that it really hits home for them. Biomedical researchers now know that cortisol, which is a powerful hormonal byproduct of stress, is also a powerful immune cell inhibitor. So what does that mean in real life? As teachers, we start the school year and the accelerator automatically goes down and it stays down for too long. We raise the danger flag too often. Stress. We get used to living here in heightened experience. And then I ask people in the audience, and then what could happen? You could get what? And everybody in unison says sick. Well, researchers always kind of poo-pooed that, and now they can prove it. What's stress? It's a perception. What is perception? It's a thought. Most stress is thoughts to illness. And I always give Deepak Chopra's great quote. Our immune system is constantly eavesdropping on our inner dialogue. Powerful way that the brain influences the body. Conversely, I talk about neurogenesis, which up until about 2 decades ago, everyone thought was impossible. So now what we know is that through aerobic activity, we can create new brain cells, new nerve cells, new neurons in the hippocampus region of the brain. And that's an incredibly powerful way that the body influences the brain. And as it turns out, the brain is probably the most the biggest beneficiary of the benefits of aerobic activity. And just yesterday, John Rady posted about weightlifting. We had this conversation, John and I did back in January this year, that weight training probably has a lot of the same cognitive benefits, which is showing that it does. I have to read more about it. I'm not that far into it. But so yeah, brain-body connection, you can't get away from it. It's always in play. As I talk with my hands and my brain is on fire, it's just who we are as learners. It looks more like life. And the more we sit kids in the classroom, the more it works against what we're trying to do.
All right. Excellent. I wish I could maybe I will. Maybe I'll just splice that 2 minute talk and shoot that out to everybody, because I think it's awesome. I mean, it's something that I think every educator should hear. Every educator should be educated on, is that brain-body connection and how important it is. And you know, you talked about stress level and how that could affect, you know, really everything, your health, your learning, every part, every aspect of your life. And I've seen research that also suggests that that it actually rewires the brain. So if somebody's in like a chronic state of stress, it could hinder them from developing different parts of their brain and learning. So I think about a child who goes to school and they're in a constant state of stress, a constant state of, you know, high levels of cortisol or fight or flight mode, and then they go to school and they're expected to sit down and take a test, and it's like their brain is all over the place. They're not prepared to take that test, but yet that's what we do to them sometimes, and they're not ready for it.
Absolutely. One of my favorite questions that I ask if I'm doing a full day of professional development, you know, what are you doing for your kids as soon as they walk in the room? Because the brain prioritizes information on 3 levels: always survival first, then emotion. And survival, hopefully kids aren't coming into school that way, but they could. If there's abuse, sexual abuse, no dinner the night before, no breakfast the morning of, that could create that survival mode. But you do absolutely have kids coming in on the emotional level all the time. Happens to the adults walking in the building as well. Stuff goes on in your life. It's who we are. And so what are you doing for those kiddos to get them to the last place the brain goes, which is the cognitive? Because something has to be done. You don't have time to get to every child to see how their day is going. Whether it's a greeting at the door, which you'll be seeing lots of those great YouTube videos of teachers with handshakes for every different kid. That's great. Just a handshake and eye contact at the door raises dopamine levels in the brain, which is a feel-good neurotransmitter. Or maybe it's a piece of music. When my wife was teaching 2nd grade, she had the theme from Cheers, where everybody knows your name every morning. Good drinking song for 2nd graders, right? They didn't know that. So it was they go to the back of the room, get arm in arm, and sway to the music until she came back and started morning meeting. There has to be something like that to have preschool through 12th grade, through adult, where they can put that aside so they can focus and get the brain ready to learn.
Yeah, and recently I've been hearing a lot about social emotional learning and how important that is to also include in the school day. And like you said, morning meetings, like offering kids a chance to really get to know each other and share their feelings with each other and identify the way they feel, and then be able to share that and communicate with that, and then also learn coping mechanisms or coping strategies if they need to, right? And that's something that even in kindergarten that I've been working with my students to do. So as they're participating in an activity, I have a little feelings wheel, and I ask them, well, how do you feel right now during this activity? And they'll tell me. And if it's ever a negative emotion, the top 3 are positive emotions, the bottom 3 are kind of negative emotions. And if it's ever a negative emotion, then we have a conversation. And that, I think, out of all the little things that I've done, has been such an eye-opening experience for me to see what's bothering these kids when they come in. And sometimes it's just as easy as, I remember this one little girl said she was really sad, she was upset, and it was affecting the way she was perceiving her experience in PE class and really in school in general, because she didn't get a sticker. She didn't get a sticker at the dentist. She just came back from the dentist, and she just wanted the sticker. And so if I would have never addressed that, then, you know, maybe she would have gotten over it. Maybe it would have lingered a little bit. And so I asked her, can I give you a sticker? And she said yes. And so I got a little piece of tape and I drew a little smiley face on it because I didn't have any stickers. And I gave her a sticker. And her eyes just lit up, and she was like, thank you. And then the rest of the class was smooth. So it was like this little tiny gesture to sort of break that feeling that she was feeling that was affecting the rest of her time in class and maybe even in school. And I think we can do that as educators, really look at that social emotional aspect of it and make those little gestures to help out.
Yeah, that's so important. And your example is phenomenal. You just took time to get her from emotion to cognitive. And it's so critical for kids. We just don't often have time to do it for individual kids. And so I ask teachers to think about, you know, what are you doing for the group? And what you've done and what I talk about is creating this emotional environment that stimulates intellectual achievement.
Mm.
Environment is so important to that. And when we go back to risk, in some environments, a kid, and probably in most environments, kids are not going to be that comfortable with taking that academic risk, raising their hand and answering the question, or participating fully in a cooperative group activity, whatever it might be. But in some classrooms where the environment has been carefully prepared and carefully nurtured, they might feel more confident to take those academic risks that really move them along as a student. And that's what we're after.
Yeah, that's really important, and that again comes with this social emotional,
Yes.
understanding and like you said, purposeful planning of the classroom and how you're going to include the students in that classroom.
Yeah, without question. It has to be purposeful. There has to be intent. Because if you have created an environment where students want to be, they're just more likely to participate in academically and intellectual in that environment.
And I know in PE they talk people talk a lot about how many hours it takes to develop a new skill, and sometimes we don't have the time, right, to develop these new skills in these students. And I saw I think it was a tweet, maybe I saw it on Twitter, where somebody suggested, and I haven't seen any research on this, and maybe you know a little bit more about this, but somebody suggested that the um, if the new skill you're learning is learned in a joyful way, or learned in a way, and I'm kind of paraphrasing because I don't remember exactly how it was worded, but learn in a way that was enjoyable, then you would learn it a lot quicker. Do you know anything about that? Or, I mean, it makes sense to me, but do you know any research that kind of would back that up?
Yeah, you know what? Not specifically, but it makes perfect sense from what I know about the brain and learning and how it processes information. That if there's joy paired with the learning, you're so much more likely to learn it more quickly. Um, if you have experienced negative emotions, or if you're not at that cognitive level, you're somewhere in the emotional. It's just going to be, frankly, more difficult to learn a skill, and it is difficult to learn. Speaking from my experience, I coached baseball for a long time, and I had a kid who had a swing, and he was like, it was like Santa Claus. He was swinging his bat over his shoulder, and he was never going to hit at the varsity level. He was a JV player at the time, so I was trying to work with him, and he was doing great, 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 great. He was able to make the adjustments, and when he got into a situation in under stress and under pressure in a baseball game, he went right back to what he did. It is so hard. Once you learn something incorrectly, it's so hard to change it. There has to be high level of motivation and a degree of high level of teaching to get that done.
Yeah, that's that's really interesting because I know in my experience as a high jumper, when I got to college, they tried to change the way I approached the bar, and it totally, I mean, it totally messed up my mindset of high jumping, and I feel like I was stuck for a long time at the same height because it felt uncomfortable again. Just when it was starting to feel sort of comfortable, and then all of a sudden it felt uncomfortable, and my muscle memory, I guess, it just was like not having it, you know.
It's why I don't take golf lessons, Jorge. I'm just trying to maximize my level of inability to do the I can with my bad swing. Because if someone comes in, yeah, I understand cognitively what it's going to take for me and how much repetition to learn something new like that. I'm not sure I want to. I'll just enjoy what I have, my high handicap.
Well, see, I'm starting from zero, and I've talked about this on the podcast before. I'm terrible at golf. I'm starting from zero, and I've been taking some golf lessons, and I'm still terrible. So we'll see. We'll see where it goes in a year or two. Um, so I also wanted to ask you about mindfulness. So that's a big
Yeah.
part of it too, in learning these mindfulness techniques to help students sort of self-regulate, right? So how important do you think mindfulness is in this whole, learning aspect?
Yeah, it's critical in life and it is critical in school. It's just critical. It's really hard to do. So, one of the things that I see with mindfulness is the definition that I disagree is too strong of a word, but when you say mindful to somebody, I think many people think you have to be quiet, you have to be meditative, you have to take some kind of, do some deep breathing to be mindful. And, the definition of mindfulness is to be present. It is to be aware of your moment right now. And that can be meditative, and that could be relaxing, and it could be using deep breathing. But mindfulness is just being aware of the moment, because when you're aware of the moment, most stress happens between our ears. It's stress about what could happen or what already happened. Squirrels run. And so if we're mindful and paying attention to the moment, you can't be stressed about something in your brain at the same time. You can't. So the more mindful and aware we can become, the less stress we have. And what movement and physical activity in the classroom do is to create those moments of being mindful. Even if the kids are crazy with energy, doing some kind of brain energizer, they're being mindful because they have to be. It's hard to do a new physical experience without being present and engaged in the moment. And that lowers stress levels. Because we're getting kids focused here instead of here.
That's good. I like that. The idea of doing, something new and sort of novel in order to help that mindfulness state. Is that something that that I guess you would purposefully plan? Because I know sometimes, because I teach kindergarten, right? And so a lot of times, a lot of things that we do are play based, and the novelty sometimes comes in the spur of the moment, where it's like, okay, you know what, we're gonna act like we're in space, and everybody starts jumping around like they're in space, or you know what, let's all act like kangaroos, and then it's spontaneous, right? And I think that's important too, to be able to be spontaneous as a teacher, and then give your students sort of permission to have those spontaneous thoughts as well. But with that, I mean, how do you balance that, right? So how do you balance the planning of novelty for mindfulness purposes, and then allowing the kids to also be spontaneous in that?
I think the spontaneity can become mindful. So you can do something spontaneous, and it's a mindful activity. And don't get me wrong, I have with Tracy Langle, we've created some graduate courses, and one of them is on staff and student wellness, and we talk about mindful. And so we have teachers do mindful walks, we have mindful conversations, we do mindful eating, and those are all quiet activities because we're trying to teach them about noticing how their raisin tastes, notice the things on the walk that you never noticed before, really listening to somebody and focusing on their conversation. Those things lower stress levels because you're present and you're not thinking here. I think even if you're being spontaneous in a classroom, that it can be a very mindful activity. But if you want, you could also be spontaneous in a deep breathing exercise, and that can bring them mindfulness as well, and lower stress levels. So I think there's a lot of options. I think one of the keys is to teach them about it, even at a young age, why it's important to be mindful, because it does lower stress levels, and it keeps us in the moment. And the more kids hear that over the years, because it's really hard to practice that. You have to really do a lot of work. So the more they hear it through the years, the better off they'll be.
Yeah, one of the things that I love to do with my kids is I have a little chime, and when I ring it, I ask them to raise their hand when they hear the chime, and as it fades away, their hand comes down. And a couple times we've done it. We've done it where, because sometimes last semester I used to share the gym with another class on the other side, so we had a curtain kind of, but it was really loud. I mean, these gyms are very echoey. And one time they were in there and they were running around and they had music going and there was screaming going on, and the kids were having fun on the other side. And I thought, this is going to be perfect. I'm going to try this. I didn't know if it was going to work, but I thought this will be perfect to help them sort of see that they can choose what they're going to be paying attention to. And so I asked them all. I was like, you gotta try this. And so I hit the chime, and everybody put their hand up, and as it faded away, they put it down, and I said, oh,
Nice.
we're gonna do it again. We're gonna do it again. So I hit it again, and they all did it. They all did it. And then I told them, I said, see, you can choose what you're going to be paying attention to. So take this, and you can take it into the classroom. You can take it out to the playground. You can take it out to your life, and you have the power to choose which you will be mindful of. And
Yeah,
just like in that instance, there was all this chaos going on around them, and they were still able to be mindful.
yeah, that's really important. That's a great activity, Jorge. Good story.
And that's a 5-year-old. These are 5-year-olds.
Yeah,
They can do it.
yeah, they can do it, and you can train 14-year-olds too. So, great story, great point, and it's really critical to be mindful as much as you can.
All right, so now we're going to get to the question and answer portion of the show. This is new. We're trying this out. Speaking of, taking risks and trying things, we're going to try something new for the show since, you were our first guest. You were, we've tried all these innovative things with you, so why not try a new one, right?
All right.
So
Great.
I have a few questions for you.
Yeah.
From social media. So the first one is from Darlene Evans. So Darlene, Darlene, I used to work with Darlene in Houston. And so she hit me up on Facebook in our Facebook group. And she wants to know, what do you think is the most effective teacher professional development in regards to brain research and movement, and something that you could sell administrators on to make this sort of a mandatory type of training for the teachers? Like, what do you think would be the most effective way to deliver that professional development to get buy-in from the teachers and administrators?
Well, and I guess that would be in several parts. I think you have to be familiar with some of the research so that you don't want to overwhelm them. But what are 2 or 3 things, two or three pieces that teachers can read? The overview. I also think it is critical that once you get to that point, getting past the research, is to have teachers feel in the professional development. That is a hallmark of what I do. It doesn't matter if it's a keynote or it's a day-long PD. The teachers are moving. They are feeling. They get a better understanding. They're more confident when they have to go back and implement it, and they get sold on it when they feel it. You're just told about physical activity, or you just show an article, whatever. It's just not going to fly. They have to really be engaged and be involved, and also understand why. All those fantastic answers of why with physical activity is really important for teachers to understand.
Awesome. Okay. Bob Knipe, he has a question for you. He says, recently there's been brain research that helps justify recess and activities in the classroom. How can we help, or how can we use this research to help support quality physical education?
Yeah, you know what, Bob? I don't think there's any better cases. I know that I know this goes back to something all of us in this field know, and that is digging into chapter 1 and 2 of Spark. It's all there. Anything that an administrator needs to know to be convinced about a quality daily physical education class is right there. The stories of Paul Zentarski, and Paul and I have presented a lot together this year. What the research that he has and the data he has from Naperville, where they have 18 PE teachers on staff at one high school in that school district, because they get it, they understand what it does for all their test scores in other areas. It's all there. Even my good friend, from Titusville, Pennsylvania, Tim McCord, he did the same thing. Saw what they were doing in Naperville. Loved Tony Robbins' quote, "Success leaves clues. Go find it, go copy it, and bring it back." He brought it back to his district. They found time for quality PE every day, and the scores went through the roof. It's all. I would start there. I'd start handing out Spark, to administrators, and please just read the first couple of chapters, and then let's talk. I think that's a great place to go.
Yeah, and you talk about test scores, and I know some people, probably listening, they probably think, oh, PE shouldn't be attached to test scores, and I agree. I definitely agree. And something that Michael Hines said when he was on the show, the superintendent from New York, he said that with a well-rounded education, with a well-rounded, effort to a well-rounded education, test scores would be a byproduct. And I thought, wow, that's just great. That hits a nail on the head. So you're creating these best versions, these students who are best versions of themselves, and all the other stuff sort of takes care of itself. So physical activity is part of that. So the test scores are a byproduct of a well-rounded education. I love that.
I think that physical education is critical unto itself. There's no doubt about that. Bob asked the question, how do we use this research to justify PE? Well, that's how you do it. But PE should be about itself. And Michael is correct. It just the higher academic achievement, the lower discipline problems, kids in school more days, just becomes a natural byproduct.
Yeah, because they feel better. They feel better about themselves, and so everything else is going to be, more positive, right? So I just wanted to address that, because I know there's a little bit of a contention to test scores and all that stuff. So yeah, but I do agree. Sometimes there's superintendents that speak that language, and sometimes you also have to speak that language to sort of get a place at the table, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so one more question from the Facebook group. John Dunlop asks, how do we get classroom teachers, especially in the secondary level, to embrace activity in the classroom and kinesthetic learning?
Yeah, so I think it's about them feeling it. I think a good place to start that's only 16 minutes long, if you're able to get your staff to watch my TED Talk, 16 minutes, it encapsulates what we're talking about today and all the work that I've done and I've done with Tracy Lengel. They can see it in that short amount of time and get a basic understanding. And then if you can move into staff meetings, doing an activity or two they can take back right away, move into maybe a half-day PD or something, or an hour, half-day, full day, where you are helping them to feel the information, they're more likely to use it. So that's how you convince teachers. They need to know why, and they need to know how to apply, and they need to know that it's going to make their life easier, which it will, versus just another something for them to do.
And, while you're at it, why not pick up a copy of the Kinesthetic Classroom?
There you go.
Invite Mike out to the district. He can do a couple presentations.
Yeah, I would love that.
Get the whole package.
Yeah.
But you know what? Honestly, the Kinesthetic Classroom is a great resource, and it really breaks down how to start off with kinesthetic learning in the classroom, and then eventually teach through movement, which is fantastic. So I would encourage everybody to pick up a copy, because it's a great book. Okay, we have one more question, and this one's from Andy Vasily. So I'm going to play it. He left me a message on my phone, so I'm going to play it, and you tell me if you can hear it, okay?
Okay, here's one. A lot of presenters present the same content over and over wherever they go. How do you continue to learn and develop yourself in order to change up and refine the content being presented in a way that shows your most recent learning?
Okay, did you hear that okay?
I did. Yeah, for me, and Andy, yeah, it's good to talk to you through Voxer and this podcast. For me personally, I get asked to do more different things than you'd think for different types of groups. So my PDs, a good 75% of the time, they look a little different from the last one. So that keeps me on my toes, having to fit what I do into this group. The other thing is, too, Tracy and I have just always, we update our coursework. We've written, several books together, and so that keeps you on your toes. We reformatted the framework and created new activities, and there's new types of movement in classrooms out there. There's new research, so we try to stay on top of that to make sure our presentations are fresh for people and fresh for us, fresh for me. I do this more than Tracy because she's a practicing classroom teacher, a practicing physical educator. And so it keeps me fresh when I try to do different things and add new activities. So I'm kind of aware of that over here. It's nice to be comfortable, with some of what you're doing, but there's usually some discomfort around what I'm doing, and it helps me to grow.
All right, excellent. Okay, so thank you so much for your time. I know we're getting close to the end of the hour. So again, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for all that you've done for, physical education teachers out there. And so I want to leave you with the last word. So let us know if somebody wanted to reach you, if they wanted to continue the conversation, where could they hit you up? And then if you have a last final message for the audience, please feel free to leave that as well.
Yeah, thank you, Jorge, and thank you for having me today. I always enjoy talking with you, and hopefully we'll get to visit in person soon. If someone wants to reach out to me, they can just go to my website, which is mikekuczala.com, and the last name is K-U-C as in Charles, Z as in zebra, A-L-A. It's kind of a difficult Polish last name. Or email is michaelskuzala@gmail.com. And I would just say to the audience that it is so important for students to be physically active. I know your first job is not advocacy. It is teaching kids about physical literacy and skills and to be physically active and literate throughout life. And, but anything that you can do to advocate to parents, to administrators, to other teachers, that would be great. You are often looked at as the resource for those people. And the more that you can advocate and be a source of information, the better off all of our students will be. So thank you very much.
All right. Great message. Thank you so much. You have a great day.
You too, Jorge. Take care.